Welcome back to ThinkTech. I'm Jay Fidell. This is Global Connections. We have a very interesting show for you featuring Dmitry Bolkunets in Warsaw and our regular contributor, Stephanie Stoll-Dalton. We're going to talk about Belarus. We're going to talk about where Belarus stands with Putin and with Ukraine and the future. Welcome to the show, Dmitry. It's great to have you here, and welcome to you too, Stephanie.
Thank you.
Dmitry, you were involved in a press club meeting in Washington just a few days ago, and we wanted to get a handle on what you guys did in Washington, who you addressed. I know it was the press club, but it was others too, on behalf of the democratic movement in Belarus, which is very important and the center of our show. So tell us about what you did in Washington.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me, and probably Valery next time will be also in your fantastic show, because we was in Washington and New York during 2 weeks, try to show, and we prepare also some proposals to U.S. government and prepare some letter for President Biden for Congress also, and we wanted to describe what happened now in Belarus, because situation is not so good like in some many democratic countries, because now in Belarus it's about 5,000 political prisoners, because Lukashenko afraid freedom, afraid some alternative position, and that is why we in Washington organized some press conference for think tanks, for embassies, for media, and some another person who interested in the situation in Belarus. And we ask US, for example, what we ask President Biden. We ask them, United States to support position European Union to issue an ultimatum to Mr. Lukashenko to release all political prisoners, or else all cargo traffic from Belarus to Europe countries will be blocked. It's very important now, because many trains from China to Europe via Belarus, and there are no another way. That is why we believe it's very important now to close all border between Belarus and the Euro Union. And if United States will support Euro Union to close this border, we believe that during short time, all political prisoners in Belarus will be released. That's one of the ideas. Secondly, idea is to organize alternative elections, online elections in Belarus, to give possibility to Belarusian people to organize so legitimate body. And another points like independent media support, and also some another points like recognize Lukashenko as a terrorist due to Geneva Declaration of Terrorist statement, and many another topics.
Well, a couple of questions out of that. You know, it was big news last week that the border between Belarus and Poland was closed. And I guess that was at the request of what? The democratic movement in Belarus, or Belarus? Who wanted it closed, and who is making it closed? Who is closing it right now?
Closed, but not enough, because I think probably one place is now continue working, and many trains from China to Europe continue every day communicate, and we need to close all border, and not for stop traffic, not stop. No, it's not for ruined economy, and it's only ultimatum to Lukashenko, because we think that Lukashenko afraid to lose all logistics, all possibility for receive money from some traffic, and that is why we think that position of Poland government, also of Lithuania, is now very important, but it will be more stronger if the US government supports this Euro Union pressure to regime Lukashenko, because he afraid US, afraid more than some European countries. That is why we ask President Biden or some persons from State Department to support position Poland and Lithuania. It's very, very important, especially now, because today Lukashenko planning visit to China during for 3 days, and that is why we think now it's time to give him ultimatum.
Oh, good. So you go to the American government and say that you want some support, but can that support be substantial when, in fact, Congress seems to be slightly divided, increasingly divided about supporting Ukraine? If they are having anxiety about supporting Ukraine, don't you think they would have anxiety about supporting Belarus?
Yes, but Belarus is a very important strategical state in Europe due to location, due to Belarus have big border with European Union. With Ukraine also, it's about 1,000 kilometers border between Belarus and Ukraine. And that is why Belarus is an important place for security in Europe. And we ask US support democratic movement, support media, support continue pressure to Lukashenko. And we understand that it's now difficult due to war in Ukraine, but we must be understand that future of Europe is also a future of Belarus. What will be happened in Belarus in next, for example, 1-2 years? It's will also very important for security for Lithuania, for Poland, and other countries. That is why we need more and more quickly changes in Belarus. Firstly, release political prisoners. Secondly, we need also stop involve Belarus to Ukraine war, to stop support Russia invasion to Ukraine, and thirdly, we need to organize free and fair elections in Belarus. That is very simple, but for that we need some resources, because many people, Belarusian citizens now in exile, many politics in exile, another politics now in the prison in Belarus. That is why we need more support from the US government. Also, we ask President Biden and members of Congress, US, we ask to hold US congressional hearings on the situation on Belarus, which will be very important, and very important to participate the last legitimate chairman of the Parliament of Belarus, Semyon Sharetsky, who is now the last 20 years living in the US in exile, and also all presidential candidates of all years. It's very important to organize this discussion in Capitol Hill in the US, probably in March, April, but we ask them to help us to organize this discussion, to show what we need, what instruments, measures we need receive from US now to organize changes in Belarus.
Yeah. So how strong is your movement? I mean, what you have here is Lukashenko, and he's the puppet. He's an autocrat. He has Putin's support, and all of Putin's resources available to him. There are Russian troops in Belarus. They have been there for a year anyway. There are Russian weapons in Belarus. They have been there for a year anyway. How strong is your movement? And do you think your movement can prevail over the existing, Lukashenko government?
Yes, you're right. The now situation is not so good like 2-3 years ago, especially before last presidential election in Belarus and before war. And now, as I mentioned, we have about 5,000 political prisoners. Also, Lukashenko involved Belarus to Ukraine war. Also, Lukashenko continue destroyed economy and many another spheres now under pressure. Media, all media, independent media in Belarus is now ruined. Close this media inside the country, and many media resources are blocked inside the country. And that is why we need more and more resources from abroad to continue our pressure against Lukashenko. A democratic movement, yes, we are now in exile. All of politics, Belarus now in exile.
Yeah. So what's interesting is that last week there was a leak of a planning document from Putin indicating that he intended to take over Belarus by the year 2030, which is what, 6 years away. Do you think that's real? And do you think that he will do that? And do you think it will be before or after, 2030? It could be before, couldn't it?
I think it's not a new plan. I think this plan it's plan probably they realized the last 20 years. Because Putin, as I now understood him, wanted to like restart or rebuild Soviet Union. That is why he believes that Ukraine and Belarus is not independent state. That is why Putin wanna probably also became Belarus like a part of Russia empire. Yes, probably this plan is realistic.
Yeah. Stephanie, you have any questions? Why don't you take a minute and ask Dmitry?
Right. Thanks, Jay. And thank you, Dmitry, for coming to the U.S. and helping us understand at a closer level, closer detail about your situation in Belarus. One way I'd like to understand what is happening is through these political prisoners you mentioned. You say that Lukashenko has accumulated 5,000 political prisoners, and of course you want them released, and there's pressure for them to be released. But I wanted to ask if those are 5,000 political prisoners related to the current conflict, and have they been accrued during the period of this conflict? So who are they, and what are their origins and their ideologies? Can we attribute all of this to the current conflict, or is it a broader mix? Can you talk to us a little bit about those prisoners and what kind of leverage it's going to take to get them released?
Yeah, according to data from human rights organizations, there are about 1,500 political prisoners. But however, in reality, it's about 5,000. Because several dozen of people not wanted to recognize them as a political prisoners due to some reasons, and due to pressure from administration of some zones. And also, Lukashenko killed by some prisoners in the last 2 years, and killed also before. Many years ago, he killed his political opponents. More than 20 years ago, and he continued do it. Who is these people? It's a politics, firstly. For example, after elections 2020, many persons who planning to took part in political presidential campaign was arrested by regime Lukashenko, and now they're in prison. Many of them received 20 years in a prison. Also, last Nobel Alexei Beletsky Peace Prize he received last year. He also now in prison. Lukashenko not afraid some politics, some journalists, some teachers, some workers, some other persons, because he, for him, is not important who these people. He afraid of these people because they not support him. That is why we think only ultimatum language is a language which Lukashenko understands, not diplomatic language, only ultimatum. And you remember 2 weeks ago, probably, many political prisoners, probably all of political prisoners, was released in Nicaragua. I think in Belarus is the same. Just we have the same situation like was in Nicaragua. And why, if Nicaragua have good experience and fantastic story with release of political prisoners, I think US also try to organize the same in Belarus.
But when you have a situation like this, Dmitry, where we know that Vladimir Putin controls Lukashenko, he controls him. He calls him up on the phone, tells him what to do on a given Tuesday morning, and Lukashenko does it. It's the same playbook that Putin is using in Russia, like with Navalny, right? With political prisoners. And you protest, you go to jail for a long time. So what we have here is a puppet government. Now, when you say that you would like to prevail and get him to leave, get him to do all kinds of things that are responsive to the democratic movement, how exactly can you get him away from Vladimir Putin so he is listening to you instead of Vladimir Putin?
Lukashenko now in international isolation. That is why he depend from Putin, from Kremlin, and Russian troops now are located in Belarus. That is why Lukashenko is now haven't any opportunity to like provide some independent policy. There are no way. And we need to understand also mentality of Lukashenko. He's a person who now living in past. He's person from the 20th century. This year will be 29 years from time when Lukashenko became a leader of Belarus. Who, when in 1994 he was elected in first probably and only election, freedom election in Belarus. Lukashenko probably now number 6 in the world among leaders who so long period working as a leader of country, of state. Yes, he's very now closer to Putin, to his policy, do it to money, do it to very strong relations in economic sphere, in politics also, and do it to some repressions, do it to some sanctions, because Lukashenko afraid about his future. Yes, probably if some international countries like US, for example, or UK, organize some probably non-public negotiation between Lukashenko and his regime about his future. For example, give him a helicopter for evacuation. Maybe it's one-off way how to move Lukashenko from his place now. And it's very important, for example, to stop a war in Ukraine. Because if in Belarus will be democratic government, there are no any chance to continue war Ukraine from Belarus territory. It's very, very important. And that is why we also need support from US, more and more strong measures to regime Lukashenko. For example, Russian media resources, propaganda, so-called propaganda, they now blocked from USA government. They haven't channels on YouTube, but Belarusian propaganda now continue to show some fake news on YouTube, many others. They now receive money from government to show advertisement, to promote the fake news materials about what happened in Ukraine. And we also ask US State Department to prepare a list and to also organize some sanctions against these propaganda resources, Belarusian propaganda resources. It's very important to close this propaganda in Belarus, because we believe that we must continue more strong measures from international community, because people in Belarus, inside country, they very afraid now due to some repressions, and every day people in Belarus arrested, every day. For example, yesterday also two leaders of democratic movement, Svetlana Tikhanovskaya and Pavel Latushka, and some other persons, they receive I think more than 15 years arrested. Oh. But due to they are not in country, it's just help him they are on freedom now. But Lukashenko continue organize some so-called just probably my English is not so good. But just a moment, I'm not an expert in this sphere. Verdict, and Lukashenko also will continue organize some provocation against leaders of democratic movement.
Okay. Oh, Dmitry, if if Lukashenko is in China now, what's the agenda there? And is it Putin's agenda that Lukashenko is working with over there with the Chinese? What are the goals there, do you believe?
I believe Lukashenko now looking possibility to receive resources, especially finance resources from China. Also, he wanted to some more strong relations with Belarus and China due to sanctions, because sanctions was from West, but not so big sanctions like to Russia. But Belarus also have some problems in economy. Lukashenko wanted to diversify economy exports from Belarus to China. That is why he now going to China with a state visit for 3 days, and that is also very important to call China, from media, call from politics, Western call to China, and tell him Lukashenko is not a recognized president. Lukashenko is not person who recognized by Belarusian people like a president. And we need to show China that it's mistake when they continue working with Mr. Lukashenko, because it's not good for future relations between China and Belarus. I hope China understands this, and probably China have some problems with Lukashenko. For example, due to closing border, because China is very dependent of Belarus. It's only one way by railway from China to Europe. No another alternative ways to transit cargoes from China to Euro Union. Probably China will be ask Lukashenko what happened, why Chinese companies lose money because some points on a border between Poland and Belarus now is closed. I hope probably it will be also one of the topic of discussion between two leaders.
You know, what seems clear is that Belarus has become more important. It is now, more at top of mind. For a year, we thought only of Ukraine. We knew there were Russians in Belarus. We knew that Putin was using Lukashenko. But now it seems more important, and that means your trip is valuable to the U.S. and to speak to the American government and to the public. But I really wonder where this is from a 50,000-foot level. It certainly seems to me that Belarus is at great risk, and that Putin sees Belarus as another target, as a target to follow Ukraine, maybe even to be simultaneous with Ukraine. And I wonder what your thoughts are about, the domino effect. First Putin takes Ukraine, and then Putin wants Belarus, and then Putin wants Poland, and who knows where else it goes. And we're not even talking about the Balkans yet. He's got Moldova and Romania. He's got Transnistria. All these countries are all at risk. So we talked about a domino effect over the past year, and it seems to me that when you think of Belarus, you think of Belarus as part of the domino effect. How do you feel about that? How do the Belarusians feel about that?
You're right. Because Belarus is very, very important now due to a strategic location in Europe. You're right. Firstly, Ukraine. Secondly, Belarus. Thirdly, will be Lithuania or Poland, because Putin or Putin probably like Lukashenko living in past. They're thinking about past, not about future. Putin won a Soviet Union 2.0, and Lukashenko also the person who many times mentioned Soviet Union. That is why we need now to show Belarusians that they will continue independence, continue fights against Lukashenko. That is why our also proposal to U.S. government to support, organize, to provide resources for the organization online elections of the representative body, like National Council of the People of Belarus during its transitional period. This will contribute to the formation of a legitimate democratic institution and to the consolidation of all democratic forces around basic principles and values. It's very important now because we haven't any legitimate body that represent people of Belarus inside and outside country. That is why we need to do some another like before that period. And we also ask U.S. support this, like U.S. support, for example, Tibet parliament in exile and another parliaments in exile or governments in exile. It's very important also to show people in Belarus that we need together with persons who now in exile and who continue democratic game inside country. We need to organize some legitimate body. That is why I think it's very important, and very important now also pressure from probably from democratic movement in US, from media US, to ask US government, to ask US politics to probably more attention for situation in Belarus. It's very important because, as I understood during my 2 weeks in US, Belarus is not in media topics now in the US, and I think it's mistake, and I think Belarus is very, very now important due to why Ukraine and due to plans Vladimir Putin, probably his plans to continue war outside Ukraine.
Yeah, that
and
was the point
probably
I was going to make, Dmitry. It strikes me that at the beginning, a year ago, Putin's rhetoric was, we just want to have what is ours, from Ukraine. This is really a Russian place, and we want it back. And we're just talking about Ukraine. But now, a year later, it seems clear that the domino play is in effect. It's not just Ukraine. It's all of Eastern Europe, which is
Yes.
of tremendous concern. And you are pivotal. Belarus is pivotal in that. And so his earlier rhetoric was not at all true. And his real plan is to take over everything. And I take your point that the U.S. ought to be very concerned about this. Likewise, Germany and NATO and the EU ought to be very concerned because, when you go into Poland, Germany is right next door. And so I think we're on a track here. Putin is on a track that wasn't necessarily visible before, right?
Yes, you're right. You're right. It's now Belarus have very, very bad role in why Ukraine, and Belarus now is very dependent of Russia policy. That is why also Belarus probably in future, if Lukashenko will be not stop, Belarus in future probably became a state from which will be Putin continue aggressions to another countries.
Stephanie?
Well, I was just going to say, this is your mission is to reveal. This is a big reveal for the American understanding of the people and the threats, and so broadening the conversation away from just the trauma of Ukraine and then the dominance and aggression of Russia is so important to get it to the bigger picture and to understand the motives here. There's some motives here that you've made very clear that maybe were not so clear before. So that's very helpful.
And there's some very interesting nuances. I read a few days ago that there are Belarusian people who crossed the border and created a regiment as part of the Ukraine army, and they are fighting for Ukraine. What does this mean? What does this reflect? What effect does this have?
Yes, we have many activists who more than 1 year, most of them also like persons who with Ukraine army fight against Russian army more than 9 years. They continue fight and secure independence of Ukraine. It's persons from Belarus, most of them from Belarus. Many people also who fights against Lukashenko in Ukraine, but if in future they will have possibility to back to Belarus, they also help Belarusians to ruin Lukashenko regime. Yeah, many people in Ukraine. I don't know how exactly, but yes, it's we have so-called army, so-called probably polk, or like I don't know how in English.
I mean, Belarusians in Ukraine, fighting for Ukraine, and essentially fighting against Belarus. So that gets very complicated.
Very.
So, Dmitry, you were out of time, but I wanted to offer you an opportunity to leave a message with people wherever they are who watch this program. to give them a takeaway, perhaps beyond what you've said?
I want to ask people who now in the US and wanted to support Belarusian democratic movement, probably to find measures, find some resources to organize some movement to support Belarusian democratic movement in the US. It will be very, very important. Probably some volunteers, some politics, some journalists who will help us to show what happened now in Belarus, what we need from US society, business, politics to continue our movement, our policy, because it's very, very difficult to do what we are now doing in abroad. For example, Belarus have given to world many outstanding figures who have made who have made some world fantastic for culture, for politics. Arvin Berlin is a person, a native of Belarus. He's one of the Americans' most brilliant composers, author of the unofficial US anthem, God Bless America. This person who at the beginning last century was immigrated to US and became fantastic in the US. Now we have probably the same. Many people from Belarus continue work in exile, but we think that we now need more support from US, from Euro Union, for persons who now continue and wanna to change Belarus.
Yeah. Yeah, Dmitry, I hope you can join us again because we would like to follow the story wherever you are. We'd like to connect up with you again to do that. Stephanie, would you thank Dmitry and summarize your thoughts?
Well, mahalo is to thank you from our island here. But the early Berlin mention is very, very important because it identifies the people who are here in the United States as part of our population who are related, who are from Belarus, and it can increase our feelings of interest and attention to them. I do hope the United States can leverage your goals and do some things to make a difference. But well, we all are at the mercy of the politics of it, but you're going about it correctly and trying to get the information broadly understood, and then the issues also on the table, on the international table for consideration, discussion, and resolution. Wish you the very best with this. It's really a frightening prospect, but I think with the kind of people that you all are, we will have an ending that's satisfactory, and certainly America's here to help.
Thank you.
But we understand through you that the fate of Belarus is inevitably linked to the fate of Ukraine and to Eastern Europe, and therefore to the liberal world order. So you are likewise pivotal in where the liberal world order goes from this point forward. And so thank you for fighting the fight, Dmitry.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much for watching ThinkTech Hawaii. If you like what we do, please like us and click the subscribe button on YouTube and the follow button on Vimeo. You can also follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn, and donate to us at thinktechhawaii.com. Mahalo.